So I wonder what you were doing in the year 1993. My friend Reverend Jim Keats reminded me about this year 1993. In 1993, I was 14 years old, watching Schindler's List, playing varsity soccer in high school. It was the year Octavia Butler published her great science fiction novel that I just got around to reading this past July, Parable of the Sower. It was also the year another particular book swept the globe, spending 71 weeks on the New York Times bestsellers list. It was a book without words. It was called The Magic Eye. In fact, it was more than one book. It became a series of books, a phenomenon of autostereograms, which allows some people to see 3D images by focusing their eyes in a new way. You can relax your vision on a two-dimensional pattern that eventually reveals a third-dimensional picture within it. The viewer must diverge their eyes in order to see the hidden 3D image within. And this morning, before worship began, we were having a discussion about which way the eyes must diverge. But the point is, your eyes must diverge. As a teenager, I spent hours staring at these images until I became skilled at finding that hidden picture within. I had a poster up in my room. It was one of those brief teen obsessions like TikTok or Roblox today. The thing about the magic eye, though, is that once you have found the image, it becomes very difficult to explain it to someone else, to help them find it. They just have to wait for it. Each person has to find the image in their own time, in their own way. Let's try it now together. You look for a while, and then this growing feeling starts to grow. What is it? Anger, frustration, humiliation, resentment. Why am I not getting it? Why am I not seeing it? Who else sees this thing that I cannot see? Frustrating. I didn't think much about the magic eye until 25 years later, when UUCA's own Amelia Shenstone said something to me. She was hanging out in my office doorway. She said something, she said offhandedly, she said, institutional racism and white supremacy in our culture is like the magic eye. You can live for so long without ever seeing it. But once you've seen it, you cannot unsee it. You know, Amelia may not even remember sharing that castaway observation with me, but I have never forgotten it because it was so true. Institutional racism and white supremacy in our culture, it's like the magic eye. Once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it. And it is difficult to help someone else to see it. Amelia's reflection brought back a memory from when I was an AIDS educator in Western North Carolina years ago. I served on a panel of speakers about faith and transgender awareness at the University of North Carolina at Asheville. And it was there I met Reverend Mahan Seiler, who has one of my favorite names, Mahan Seiler. He's an elderly white Southern Baptist minister who served a large congregation in Raleigh for many years and had retired to Asheville. He served on this panel of speakers, most of us queer in some way or younger, transgender, but here he was, this older white Southern Baptist preacher gentleman, and his crystal blue eyes sparkled as he rose from his chair on the panel and said in a slow Southern drawl that I won't try to emulate, He said, I was raised in a conservative Southern family, and I became a Southern Baptist minister. But for me, the first horse out of the barn was feminism. The second horse out of the barn was racism and white supremacy. And the third horse out of the barn was the plight of gays, lesbians, bisexual, queer, and transgender folks. Mahan Seiler said, his family, his friends, and all the people that he has known in his life shared their experiences with him, their experiences of struggle, of violence, of aggression, lack of opportunity. They shared all of that with me, he said. And each time they shared that with me, I had the humiliating realization that all the privilege I ever had from being male, white, heterosexual, cisgender, it was undeserved. I was ashamed when I realized the ease my whiteness, my maleness, and my heterosexuality afforded me. And I vowed to spend my life and my ministry working for equity and justice in every way I possibly could. Now, on this panel, it was one thing to hear me, Yankee, sort of half-Jewish daughter of socialists, say something like this, but it was quite another for rural North Carolinians to hear an older, educated, white, straight Southern Baptist preacher share his journey of transformation and mention stopping at humiliation and shame along the way towards deeper learning. Which brings me to the true inspiration for this sermon. It was a sign I saw at a Black Lives Matter protest earlier this summer. Now, I don't know if you can see the sign this gentleman is holding, but it reads, "I'm sorry I was late. I had a lot of learning to do." The humility in this statement is beautiful, and it is powerful. We don't always know what we don't know. Thank you, George. White supremacy is insidious in that way. In America, it is the water we swim in, and if we benefit from it, we cannot always see that three-dimensional image of oppression that is woven through every single facet of American life. The question I have for you, when we become aware of the water we are swimming in, how do we help others to breathe? How do we help others to see what we also see? One answer, I think, is a release of ego, a return to a new understanding of the self as love, as beloved. And this is deep soul work. This is more than can be taught in one sermon. This is more than you can learn in one moment. The monk and the mystic Thomas Merton wrote, "To say we are made in the image of God is to say that love is the reason for my existence. Being love is my true identity. Being love is my true identity," he said. That soul work of transformation, it's waking up to and falling into this love, capital L, love. It's unsettling, joyful, resilient. This awareness of ourselves with love at the core, it's a different foundation, a foundation from which we can interrogate and change the lies we tell ourselves about earning our worth. From this deeper center, we find both the freedom to release earlier binding attachments to unearned privilege and the freedom to risk extravagant self-giving. The freedom to release and the freedom to risk. This transformation occurs always in relationship. This again from Reverend Mahan Seiler. We are a part of an interconnected web, an entangled universe, as quantum physicists name it. We live and we move in mutual relationships with spirit, with nature, and with one another. relationships provide that context of transformation. To be is to be with. Now, this shift to our primary identity changes the way we carry ourselves in the world. Here are a few examples of what Mahan Seiler means and what I mean. You have a vocation, but you are not primarily your vocation. At the core, you are love. You have a personality, but you are not primarily your personality. At the core, you are love. You have weaknesses and you have failures, but you are not primarily your weaknesses and failures. At the core, you are love. You have racism. You have other oppressions as a wound to be healed, but you are not primarily a racist. At the core, you are love. You have successful achievements, but you are not primarily your accomplishments. At the core, you are love. Let us take my racism as an illustration. If my identity is primarily Taryn, that is my ego, my personality, my gifts and abilities, my failures, and someone calls me a racist or points out my racism, well, I may be defensive and unable to hear the full truth, which would be a gift. But if I am grounded in my true core identity as love and beloved, then I am free to acknowledge the truth of my racism. And from that inner grace, I call it an inner grace, I am more able to admit my own white privilege, my complicity with white supremacy, and I am able to work to minimize its destructive force in relationships, to deepen my own self-awareness. I have to cultivate inner grace to become comfortable with being wrong, with being quiet, being farther from the center of focus. This ego strength is also connected to a spiritual sense of wonderment and curiosity. And it's a curiosity that I believe our principles call us to. In his book, The Religious Case Against Belief, James Carse illustrates some important nuances of wonder and distinguishing three types of ignorance. He talks about ordinary ignorance is just simply not knowing. We don't know who will win the World Series, or if there will be a World Series, or when we will die. They're just things we don't know and cannot know. Then, the second kind of ignorance is willful ignorance. Willful ignorance is choosing not to know. We may choose not to hear the news of a bad diagnosis. We may choose not to hear news of some of our own bad behavior. We may choose not to admit the verification of global warming. We can close our eyes and refuse to listen to what we don't want to see or hear. And I would argue that many white people do live in willful ignorance. And then there is a third way, higher ignorance, Carse suggests. Higher ignorance is learned curiosity. Learned curiosity about what we don't know. It's the wondering about that fuels scientists, philosophers, yes, theologians and preachers too. This perspective invites us to lead with inquisitive questions, not answers. Only from not knowing can we reach for the understanding we do not yet possess. Higher ignorance exchanges the certainty of right believing in our own rightness, exchanges that for curiosity, mystery. The risks of faith, Carse insists, do not guarantee safe conclusions. Rather, they assure the exhilaration of creativity and new learning. Now, I remember the moment that I was steeped in white privilege when I had lived ignorantly, believing my whole life in my own salvation through wokeness because of my proximity to people of color or because of my UU upbringing. I believed myself to be one of the good white people with really no action or proof to support my claim. Just an arrogant distaste for the true racists out there, and a hatred of any Confederate nostalgia, and a personal history of attending demonstrations and marches on MLK Day or other key moments. But the truth was, racism and white supremacy were living in me too, though I could not see it. And in one memorable moment in my early 20s, that racism was revealed very publicly. It was a horribly painful, completely humiliating experience, which I recommend to everyone. Yes, it was socially isolating. And yes, I was filled with shame. And yes, my ego left my body and dove into the nearest manhole. And I was stupefied by my own racism as a young adult. I was already in my 20s. I should have known better. I had already done the reading. I should have known better. In that moment, I felt every other person was a flower already bloomed. And here I was, still in bud. The beautiful three-dimensional image was hidden, but only to me. Seemed like everyone else could see it. Now, my friends, my classmates, and colleagues did something for me I can never repay my entire life, nor properly thank them for. They took me in. I went on a listening tour. I shut my mouth, finally. I stopped flashing all my woke signals and all my rationalizations, and I just asked how they felt when I had done what I had done. They helped me to see the harm I had caused. They admitted that, yes, I was late to the party, but I could still join the movement. It was similar, as Don Milton said to me earlier this summer when I sheepishly told him after years of stubborn resistance and even resentment that I had finally seen Hamilton and found it breathtaking. Don said to me, "It's okay if you are late, as long as you show up." You remember?
I do.
Well, this is what my friends said to me too that day. For me, on the other side of that shame and humiliation, there was an ocean of grace. All that pain of sudden self-awareness, privilege, and yes, racism. Now, this movement from formation into transformation, well, it did require spending some time in shame and humiliation. And it was akin to what the poet called the helplessness of childhood, of not knowing who I was in this new world anymore. All the things that I thought were just personal about me were actually political about all of us. The pain of listening to the harm I had caused, well, that pain is still in my body's memory. I can still feel it. And I know many of us will do anything to avoid humiliation, shame, and pain. We are all awake to some dynamics in our world, and we are all asleep and unaware of others, each of us. There is no such thing as political correctness. There is only deeper and deeper self-awareness. I say there is no such thing as political correctness. There is only deeper and deeper self-awareness. Whenever you arrive to that radical self-awareness of your own privilege, you are right on time. Whenever you are ready to be curious about how you impact someone else, you are right on time. Whenever you are ready to relinquish your privilege, you are right on time. Whenever you are ready to transform yourself, to make changes, to admit you are wrong, to admit, yes, you have more to learn, I will be here for you. We will all be here because that's what it is to be in community. We will be ready to walk with you through some pain, through some shame, and return to grace. Maybe you are 15. Maybe you are 50. Maybe you are 90. You are not too late to come to some fresh understanding of yourself and relationship to the world. This is what our Unitarian Universalist faith teaches us, that we are lifelong learners, that we are doing this spiritual work our entire lives. What a blessing to be curious. The best thing we can do is to be brave in relationship to one another, to cultivate inner grace, strengthening our resilience for conflict, and to being wrong. And I'm going to be wrong too again. It's okay. We can make brave space where people are able to name the harm in the room as it's happening. This is a new way of being. To risk the pain of shame in fully hearing and understanding how we may have harmed or hurt someone. To choose learned curiosity about someone else's life and our relationship to it. To assume we have more to learn and to welcome that learning with a wide open heart. The most exciting thing about this pandemic freedom summer has been, for me, the sheer number of protesters, young and old, who are coming out, showing up, marching, proclaiming Black Lives Matter. Yes, Black lives have always mattered. Yes, in some ways, this is all 400 years, 8 minutes, and 20 seconds too late. And yet, for those of you who are showing up for justice for the very first time, you are right on time. Whenever you get here, we're just glad you're here. The time is right because John Lewis reminded us all this week in his posthumous, beautiful New York Times letter to America. He left us with our marching orders for you and for me now. In this time, he said, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate the way of peace. The way of love and nonviolence is the more excellent way. Now it is your turn to let freedom ring. John Lewis told us, when historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide. Amen. May it be so.